across Scotland, I work from a rights-based approach, environmental rights and different sustainability and climate change issues. So not just concerning STEM, but certainly that's a big part of it when it comes to tackling things like biodiversity loss as a result of climate change. And hearing from children across Scotland, certainly nature degradation, biodiversity loss, and wanting to learn more about that from a political and a scientific perspective is something that really strongly comes through. And that's coming from children as young as sort of 3 years old, all the way up to 12 years old, which is generally the age group we work with. So slightly less of a young people's perspective, but showing that these issues are something of concern to younger children as well, whether or not they are framed through formal science education. I'm also doing my PhD at the University of Stirling, so looking at nature emergency research, but more specifically looking at how we can co-create responses to biodiversity loss with children. So of course that does concern education and STEM education, because often children have the community knowledge or the local knowledge of what is going on around them, but they want to learn more about it and they want to know how that's connected to national and international scales, and also where impact comes from in science. So who do they get their knowledge from, and who do they get their thoughts about solutions or outcomes in science from? So one method that we use, or I use often in my work to approach this, is looking at children's human rights. I think sometimes we see environmental rights or science and STEM as possibly separate to human rights or to political rights, but actually the way we approach it is that you our children are more likely to engage with the world around them, with their scientific knowledge, with their understanding of nature and the natural world, um, with greater agency, with greater ability to influence that world and also see themselves as part of it if they have a real grounding in their children's human rights, in their ability to be rights bearers and to know when things impact their lives and their well-being and their political access in a way that will also possibly impact the world around them. So everything we do is through what we call a rights-based approach. So first we work with the children for them to understand what a healthy, happy, and safe life across all of their human rights would look like and how that concerns the world around them as well. And something that comes up through really strongly in that is that when children see this framing of rights and also adult responsibility to be giving them an education that's holistic, co-created, and relevant to the important issues around children, this concept of intergenerational equity and justice comes out quite strongly. So you'll see across the world really that children and young people have actually been at the forefront of things like climate activism and calling for a better world and a better future. And I think this is, I feel strongly, something that should come into their STEM education as well. So if we're teaching science, if we're teaching about the world around children growing up now, we should also be teaching them about how they can influence that and their rights for that to be a happy, healthy, and safe environment as well, and for them to understand and see the political decisions or access that have led us to this position that we're in now. So through this approach, we try and use really creative methods, we use really co-created methods, and we make sure that it's accessible to all children, not just those who identify as being part of an eco club or activists or really interested in their science education. And often we see that that builds the capacity of children to claim and defend their rights, but also of children's rights across the world and seeing other perspectives. And then also working with duty bearers, so whether that's a teacher in a classroom or a local decision maker or a national, international decision maker, to see that they have an obligation to provide a certain type of education and a certain type of environment, or also thinking about climate, that means that all children have access to this kind of safe space. It's not moral luck upon having like a really good teacher or really good access in a community, and building lots of relationships throughout their education that have trust and kindness, love and fun at the heart of it. And I think something that I'm really interested in my PhD is seeing children as experts in the scientific and knowledge about the natural world that they have now, because I am not a child right now. They are a child growing up in a world where they're learning about the world around them through the lens of climate crisis and changes to nature that we maybe haven't seen before. Um, and I think another important thing is to not see any child of any age as not being old enough to take these issues seriously. This poster was made by a child who's 5 years old that we work with, and we made protest posters together. And I think it's also important to note that part of this human rights framing, I think, helps to approach science education or biodiversity education from a hope-based perspective. It has to be fun and accessible, as I know Science Kaylee is very good at doing, but it has to be fun and accessible. Otherwise, I think it can drain educators, it can drain community members, and it's certainly not going to be engaging or sustainable for children's well-being. And I think finally, I'll just end on the power of intergenerational responses. So education and exploring political issues between children and adults is something where children and adults actually come together and learn from each other. And that might mean that adults need to take their responsibility to fulfill children's rights or engage in training or learn from each other, and also lean into complexity and prioritizing children's rights when it comes to thinking about the issues we're facing or the educational topics we're talking about with children. And I think listening to gaps, so where children maybe express some concerns or opinions, but there are gaps in what they express or how they express it, noticing that and working with them to support them to explore that, and ultimately building their capacity. So every approach we take builds the children's capacity in that community, and making sure that participation is meaningful. So it's not just a sort of one-off project or a one-off piece of engagement. It's something that's long-term and build children's capacity to grow up in a better world. And I think I always remember a quote by Rebecca Solnit, who's a really wonderful nature writer, where she talks about how if we are not bringing hope to children, then we kind of failed all other parts. So ultimately, all biodiversity education, all climate change education really should be underpinned by creativity and hope, and also clear accountability, clear feedback loops, and clear engagement with children. And I just love this quote from a child that we worked with, age 10. They said, if adults want to know something about the world, they should just ask the children around them, because ultimately they know very much about their experiences of the world and their certain types of knowledge. If you'd like to learn a bit more, we have some toolkits on our website. I'll pop them in the chat as well. Some of them are time stamped to events like COP26, or we have a yearly cabinet meeting between children and decision makers. But there's lots of activities that you could be very welcome to share widely and use across many different age groups and many different contexts. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sophia. Loads to pick on there. I'd be really interested. Obviously, Scotland's now generating a new human rights bill or proposing one, and how that might interact. But yeah, I guess welcome any questions, clarification points from anyone else in the network. Thinking time, but maybe whilst we're waiting, how has Children's Parliament been engaging in the kind of the new human rights bill? Oh, there we go.
We're pretty focused on the United Nations, the UNCRC bill. We're one of the driving kind of organizations working with other organizations and also bringing children into that campaign. So a few of our members of Children's Parliament spoke at in Parliament when it was passed last 2 months ago. It's January now. So we're hoping to be very involved in things like more of the implementation side, rather than always bill shaping. Because I think we're more concerned about the everyday realities of children and empowering educators and adults who work and live very closely with children. But I think we'll try to be very involved in co-creating things. So like impact assessments, human rights or child rights impact assessments, or environmental rights impact assessments as well. If you have sort of the UNCRC coming in and possibly legislation such as Ecocide, which is picking up a bit of traction, or the education reform bill as well, trying to ensure that children are part of that co-creation process if they want to. Yeah.
So yeah, that's really useful. And thanks for the link as well. And actually one of the questions on the Padlet was for some climate change resources. So that is definitely a good start. And I guess, unless there's any other questions, I've had the pleasure of working with Children's Parliament in delivery. Obviously, you know, Sophia, around AI, and I really appreciated how some of this, because a lot of this can sometimes feel quite theoretical, and I really appreciated how it manifested in practice in terms of, for example, having the Children's Parliament mantra at the very beginning was a really nice example. And so I wonder if you're happy to share maybe one very practical for the practitioners of the room, like example of how you manifest these, the children's rights approach?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wasn't quite sure whether to go like practical example based or a little more theoretical today. So feel free to email me. I popped it in the chat if you ever want any ideas. Because I've worked in this for a long time. But I think it's really about setting up a physical space sometimes. So we really like to think about like as much as possible. And obviously in any participatory work and action research work, you're considering what your position is that you're bringing into a room. So we really try and flatten the hierarchy between adults and children in a room. So we'll bring loads of colors, loads of really hands-on things, loads of different options around a room so children can freely roam and decide what they want to do. We all sit on the ground together where possible, sit in a circle so we can all see each other, and make sure that everyone is able to say what they're enjoying, what they're concerned about, even if that's quietly writing something down so it's accessible. But I think very much just even thinking about a physical space and also always starting the day with warm feelings and talking about our emotions and checking in with each other. No matter the age of the children, no matter what they say, it's super important to be asking, I think, and really recognizing and listening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. And yeah, again, lovely to see how it all worked in practice as well myself. So any questions, please fire them to Sophia. Thank you very much. I'll